"Don't turn there," shouted the blind passenger before he took that road. David Mitchell had been behind the wheel for 8 hours straight when he got the ride. The light rain falling over Chicago made the car headlights multiply on the wet pavement, creating a hypnotic scene that would leave any tired driver dazed. That's when she got into the back seat. The young woman held a white cane firmly and wore dark sunglasses, even though it was almost 11 at night. When she gave the address, David noticed her voice trembled slightly. "Good evening, it's to Maple Street, number 847, please," she said, settling into the seat. "Perfect, let's go," David replied, turning on the GPS. For the first few miles, she remained silent. David could only hear the soft sound of rain on the windshield and her controlled breathing, as if she were steadying herself. He had noticed that many visually impaired passengers had a special relationship with the sounds around them, and he respected this moment of focus. The GPS signaled a right turn in 500 yards. It was a road David knew well. He had lived on the north side of the Windy City for many years. Sycamore Road was a shortcut known to all local drivers, especially useful for avoiding expressway traffic during rush hour. But when David began slowing down to make the turn, the passenger's reaction was immediate and desperate. "No, don't turn there, for God's sake," she shouted, stretching her hands forward as if she could physically stop the car from turning. David instinctively hit the brakes, startled by the desperation in her voice. "Easy, miss, what's wrong?" "Please, keep going straight. I'm begging you." "Keep straight," she repeated, now visibly shaking. David glanced in the rearview mirror and saw her gripping the cane so tightly her fingers had turned white. Tears were streaming behind the dark sunglasses. "Are you okay? I can take another route, no problem," he said, genuinely concerned. "Thank you," she whispered, and David could hear the relief in her voice. He accelerated again, continuing straight down the main avenue. The GPS immediately recalculated, adding 15 more minutes to the trip. For a few minutes, silence returned to the car, but David could sense something had shifted in the atmosphere. "I'm sorry for shouting," she finally said. "It's just, I recognized the smell." The smell. Sycamore. That road has a lot of sycamore trees on both sides. The scent is very strong, especially after the rain. David had never noticed it before, but now that she mentioned it, it made sense. For someone who relied on senses other than sight, specific scents must serve as landmarks. "Do you know that road?" he asked, trying to keep his tone casual. The answer took a few seconds. "I do, that's where I lost my sight 5 years ago." David felt a tightness in his chest. He hadn't expected such a personal revelation, and suddenly felt like he'd intruded on her privacy by asking. "I'm so sorry," was all he could say. "It wasn't your fault," she replied, and David detected a bitterness in her voice that went far beyond the usual grief of someone who'd suffered a tragedy. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. They continued in silence for a few more minutes until she picked up her phone and made a call. "Hello? It's me, Sarah," she said into the phone. "He almost took me there. Almost. But I managed to stop it." David tried not to listen, but it was impossible in the close quarters of the car. The voice on the other end was inaudible, but he could tell it was a tense conversation. "No, it wasn't a coincidence. He knew, I'm sure he knew," Sarah continued. David felt a chill. Who was he? And what did "he knew" mean? "Change of plans. Take me to a different address," she said after hanging up. "St. James Street, number 234. "But what about the first address?" "Forget the first address. St. James Street, number 234. David entered the new destination into the GPS. It was downtown, even farther away. He couldn't deny his curiosity about the whole situation, but something told him it was better not to ask more questions. During the new route, Sarah grew visibly more tense. She held her phone in her hands, constantly checking for messages. Through the rearview mirror, David could see her fingers moving across the screen, likely using the phone's accessibility features. "Can I ask you something?" David said when they stopped at a traffic light. "Go ahead." "You said you lost your vision on that road. Was it an accident?" Sarah stayed silent so long that David thought she wouldn't answer. "That's what everyone thought," she finally said. But it wasn't quite like that. David sensed there was a much more complex story behind that simple answer. He wanted to ask more, but something in her posture suggested the topic was too delicate to explore with a stranger. When they reached St. James Street, David noticed it was a middle-class residential neighborhood. The houses were small but well kept, with simple gardens and low fences. Number 234 was a yellow house with a small front porch. "This is it," he said. "Thank you. How much for the ride?" $22. Sarah handed over the money and a generous tip. "Thanks for not turning down that road," she said before getting out. David watched as she walked confidently to the front door, using her cane to guide her. Clearly, she knew the place well. An elderly woman opened the door before Sarah even knocked, as if she'd been waiting. Her reaction was immediate and intense. She brought her hands to her face, and even from a distance David could see she was crying. The two women embraced for a long moment in the doorway. David was about to leave when he recognized the elderly woman. It was his mum, Mrs. Louise. He quickly parked the car and got out, unable to believe what he was seeing. His mother had lived there for over 20 years, but he hadn't visited in months because of family disagreements that seemed impossible to resolve. "Mom," he called, stepping toward the porch. Mrs. Louise turned toward the voice and froze when she recognized her son. "David, what are you doing here?" "I brought her," he said, pointing at Sarah. "She was my passenger." Sarah turned toward David's voice, clearly confused. "What do you mean? You know Mrs. Louise." "She's my mum," David answered, still processing the coincidence. "Your mum?" Sarah asked, and David could hear more than surprise in her voice. There was tension, as if that information changed everything. Mrs. Louise looked from David to Sarah, then back at David. "Son, you need to come inside." "You?" Now she said with urgency David didn't understand. "Mom, I just dropped her off. I don't need to come in." "Yes, you do. Please, David, come in." Sarah held Mrs. Louise's arm. "Mrs. Louise, you said he's your son?" "Yes. David is my youngest. I've talked about him many times." David was completely lost. How did his mother know Sarah? And why were both acting like this meeting was more than just a coincidence? "Mum, how do you know Sarah?" "Come inside first, son. There's a lot you need to know." Mrs. Louise guided them both into the house. The room was exactly as David remembered it. Antique but well-preserved furniture, many family photo frames, and the distinctive scent of his childhood home, a mix of brewed coffee and lavender. Sarah moved around the house with a familiarity that surprised David. She had clearly been there many times before. "Sarah is the nurse who took care of me in the hospital," Mrs. Louise explained. "When I had that severe pneumonia 2 years ago." David vaguely remembered his mum's hospitalization. At the time, he was going through financial troubles and had fought with the family over inheritance issues. He had barely visited his mum during her hospital stay. "But I looked for her for months after I left the hospital," Mrs. Louise continued. "She just disappeared. Her colleagues at the hospital said she had requested an urgent transfer, but no one knew where." "I had to leave," Sarah said, sitting on the couch. "I didn't have a choice." "Why?" David asked. Sarah hesitated, glancing at Mrs. Louise as if seeking permission to continue. "Because I found out something I wasn't supposed to, about the doctor who treated patients in the ward where your mom was hospitalized." "Dr. Richard?" Mrs. Louise asked. "That's right, Dr. Richard Anderson." David felt a knot in his stomach at the name. Dr. Richard Anderson was his brother-in-law, married to his older sister, Jennifer. "What did you find out about him?" David asked, though he already feared the answer. "That he was performing unnecessary surgeries and procedures on patients to inflate insurance costs, especially elderly patients who were less likely to question or understand what was happening." "That's a very serious accusation," David said. "It is. And when I started questioning some of the procedures, he realized I was suspicious. That's when things got dangerous for me." Mrs. Louise held Sarah's hand. "I always suspected something was wrong. They wanted to do 3 surgeries on me that seemed unnecessary. Sarah was the one who advised me to get a second opinion." "And was that when you lost your sight?" David asked Sarah. "Is this related?" "It is. Dr. Richard operated on me. He said I had a serious eye condition that needed immediate correction or I'd lose my vision." I trusted him because he was a respected doctor, working at the same hospital as me. But the surgery didn't work. The surgery wasn't necessary. I found out later when I saw other specialists. He deliberately damaged my vision during the operation to silence me. I had gathered evidence about his fraud, and he knew. David was in shock. His sister was married to a man who had intentionally blinded someone to cover up crimes. Do you have proof of this? I do. That's why I was able to leave the hospital without any major issues. He knew if something happened to me, the evidence would come out. But that's also why I had to disappear for a while. And why come back now? Because I heard your mom was looking for me, and because I found out he's still doing the same thing to other patients. I can't stay silent anymore. Mrs. Louise squeezed Sarah's hand. My dear, I knew you were special. From the first day in the hospital, you were different from the other professionals. More attentive, more caring. Now I understand why. David was trying to process all the information. His family had issues, but he never imagined they were connected to something as serious as medical fraud and intentional harm. Does my sister know anything? I don't know, Sarah replied, but I suspect she must have some idea. It's impossible to live with someone for so long and not notice anything. Jennifer always had a complicated relationship with the truth, Mrs. Louise said sadly. Even as a child, she preferred to believe the most convenient version of facts. David remembered that. Jennifer had always been the daughter who sought social status and material comfort above all else. When she married Dr. Richard, she finally had the luxurious life she always wanted. What do you plan to do now? David asked Sarah. It depends. Will you help me, or will you defend your family? The question caught David off guard. He looked at his mom, who was clearly waiting anxiously for his answer. If what you're saying is true, I'll help, but I need to understand the whole situation better. Sarah nodded. That's fair. But there's one thing you need to know first. What? That road where I lost my sight? Sycamore Road? That's where your brother-in-law took me on the day of the surgery. He said it was for a special procedure at a private clinic, but it wasn't. It was a remote place where he could perform the operation without witnesses. David felt sick. Are you saying he operated on you somewhere that wasn't a hospital? Exactly. A back alley clinic he uses for the more delicate cases. When we left, I could barely see. He told me it was normal, that my vision would come back in a few days. It never did. Why didn't you report it at the time? Because he had fabricated evidence that I was stealing medication from the hospital. If I accused him, he'd accuse me first. Without my sight and with a theft charge, who would believe me? Mrs. Louise shook her head, furious. What a terrible man. And to think Jennifer's been married to him for 6 years. There's more, Sarah said hesitantly. What? Today wasn't a coincidence. I looked for you, David. What do you mean? I knew you were a rideshare driver. I got your phone number through some contacts and made an account specifically to request a ride with you. David fell silent, processing the information. You used me. I did, but I had a reason. I needed someone from the family to help me expose your brother-in-law. Someone Jennifer respects, who could make her see the truth. And you thought I was that person? Your mom talked a lot about you while I was in the hospital with her, about how honest and hard-working you were, unlike your sister, about how you two had fought because you refused to take money from shady sources. David remembered the fight. Jennifer had offered him money to buy a better car for work, but something about where it came from hadn't felt right. He'd refused, and it led to a rift between them. So, you planned all this? I planned the ride, yes, but I didn't plan for you to take that road. When I realized we were heading toward the back alley clinic, I panicked. I thought you knew about it, that you were taking me there on purpose. And now? Now I know you have nothing to do with your brother-in-law's crimes, and I need your help to expose him. David looked at his mom, who was clearly waiting for him to do the right thing. What exactly do you want me to do? First, help me gather more evidence. Second, help me convince your sister to cooperate. And third, when it's time to file the formal complaint, I need credible witnesses, people who know the family and can vouch for my character. This could destroy my family. David, Mrs. Louise said softly, our family is already broken. You haven't spoken to Jennifer in months. I barely see my grandkids because she prefers the company of her wealthy friends. And now we find out she's married to a man who commits horrible crimes. The truth may be painful, but at least it's honest. David knew his mum was right. The Mitchell family had already fallen apart long before this revelation. Maybe it was time to try rebuilding on a firmer foundation. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out. Now, continuing. All right, he finally said. I'll help, but I want to see the proof first. Sarah smiled for the first time since getting into his car. Thank you. The evidence is in a safe place, but before I show you, I need to tell you the whole story. You have to understand exactly what we're dealing with. For the next 2 hours, Sarah explained in detail how she had begun to suspect Dr. Richard. Small things that didn't add up. Patients coming in for simple surgeries and leaving with complex complications. Expensive medications prescribed unnecessarily. Families pressured into authorizing procedures other doctors deemed unnecessary. At first, I thought he was just overly cautious, Sarah explained. Some doctors really are more conservative and prefer extra tests and procedures to be sure. But when I started tracking the financial results, I noticed a pattern. What kind of pattern? His patients always had much higher bills than other doctors' patients with similar cases. And he always suggested specific clinics and labs for follow-up tests. Clinics where he had a financial stake? Exactly. I found out he was a silent partner in at least 3 labs and 2 clinics he regularly recommended. David was starting to grasp the scale of the scheme. And you documented all this? I photographed records, recorded conversations, made copies of patient files, all legally as part of my job as the head nurse in charge of the department. And when did he find out you were investigating? He didn't at first, but I made a mistake. I questioned a specific surgery in front of other colleagues. An elderly patient was being prepped for an operation that seemed completely unnecessary. I suggested the family get a second opinion. Then what? The family took my advice. The second doctor said the surgery wasn't just unnecessary, it would actually harm the patient. Dr. Richard was furious. That's when he decided to silence you. Yes. A few days later, he called me in for a routine checkup. He said during my annual work exam, he'd detected an irregularity in my eyes that needed immediate investigation. Mrs. Louise shook her head, outraged. And you believed him? Of course I did. He was a respected doctor. I worked with him every day. It never crossed my mind he could be lying. How was the surgery? He said it was a simple procedure, done at a specialized clinic where he had access to more advanced equipment. He gave me something to relax before we left the hospital, and I didn't question it. Do you remember what happened during the surgery? Very little. I was sedated but not completely out. I remember hearing voices, feeling pain, trying to speak but not being able to, and I remember the smell of eucalyptus when we left the clinic. David felt a knot in his stomach. The image of Sarah, helpless and mutilated by someone she trusted, was too disturbing. And after? When I woke up the next day, he told me the surgery had been more complicated than expected, but my vision would gradually return. He spent 3 weeks giving me false hope before admitting there had been unexpected complications. And that's when you found out the truth. Not right away. It took me months to accept my blindness was permanent, and a few more months to start suspecting it wasn't an accident. What made you suspect? A conversation I overheard by chance. Dr. Richard was talking on the phone with someone about taking care of the nurse problem and how some people learn to keep their mouths shut the hard way. At the time, I wasn't sure if he meant me, but something deeply unsettled me. And that's when you started investigating. Yes, even without my sight, I got help from some colleagues to gather more evidence. That's when I found out I wasn't the first employee he'd neutralized when they became problematic. Were there other victims? At least 2 I could identify. A lab tech who questioned some test results that seemed altered. She was transferred to another hospital after an accident, left her with permanent back problems, and an older nurse who started asking why so many of his patients needed emergency surgeries. What happened to her? forced retirement for mental health issues. After she began asking questions, Dr. Richard orchestrated a situation where she appeared to have a nervous breakdown at work. David was shocked by how systematic the crimes were. "And why did you decide to come back now?" "Because I found out he's planning to expand the scheme. He wants to open a new clinic and is recruiting other doctors to join. If we don't stop him now, the number of victims will grow exponentially." "How did you find out?" "I have a friend who still works at the hospital. She told me Dr. Richard has been having a lot of secret meetings with other doctors, and there are rumors he's offering investment opportunities to select colleagues." "Does your sister know anything about this?" "I don't know. But she must realize her lifestyle has improved significantly in recent years. The new house, the imported cars, the constant trips. There's no way she hasn't noticed where all that money is coming from." David remembered the changes in Jennifer's life. Over the years, she'd become more and more flashy about her wealth. Expensive parties, designer clothes, a huge house in an upscale neighborhood. Back then, he assumed Dr. Richard was simply making good money as a successful doctor. "What do you think she'll do when she finds out the truth?" "I don't know," Sarah answered honestly. "She might choose to ignore the truth to keep her lifestyle, or she might discover she has a stronger conscience than she thinks. What if she decides to protect her husband? Then we'll have to expose everything without her help. It'll be harder, but not impossible." Mrs. Louise, who had stayed quiet for most of the conversation, finally spoke. "Jennifer was always a complicated girl, but she's not bad. As a child, she stood up for stray animals, helped classmates who were bullied at school. I believe that good side is still in her." "Mom, that was a long time ago. People change." "They change, but the heart doesn't. She may be lost now, but not forever." David wanted to believe his mom, but he had doubts. Jennifer had become a very different person over the years. "How do you want to approach her?" he asked Sarah. "Carefully? She can't know we're investigating her husband, at least not at first." "And how do we do that?" "You'll reschedule a family visit. Say you want to make amends, that you've realized life's too short to hold grudges. Your mom can come along. And then? Then we observe. We try to better understand the dynamic between them. We pay attention to how she reacts when his work comes up, whether she asks questions or shows concern. What if she suspects something's wrong? Then we'll see whose side she's really on." David was nervous about seeing Jennifer after so long, especially knowing what he now knew about her husband. But he understood it was necessary. "When do you want to do this?" "As soon as possible. Every day that passes, Dr. Richard could be harming more people." "All right, I'll call her tomorrow." "Thank you, David. I know this isn't easy for you." "It really isn't, but it's the right thing to do." When David finally left his mom's house, it was past midnight. The rain had stopped and the streets were empty. He drove home slowly, thinking about everything he'd uncovered in the last few hours. His life had completely changed in a single night. That morning, he'd just been a rideshare driver with ordinary family problems. Now, he was caught up in an investigation into medical fraud and intentional harm. But more than that, he'd reunited with his mom after months apart. And he'd met Sarah, an extraordinary woman who'd suffered a terrible injustice but still held onto her dignity and determination to fight for the truth. The next day, David woke up with a mix of anxiety and resolve. He called Jennifer around 10 in the morning. "David?" Her voice sounded surprised. "Is something wrong?" "No, Jennifer, I just wanted to talk. It's been too long." "Really? What a surprise. I know we fought, but lately I've been thinking life's too short to stay distant like this." There was a pause on the other end. "Are you okay?" "This doesn't sound like you." "I'm fine. Maybe just wiser. What if Mom and I come visit you and Richard tomorrow?" "Mom, you two made up?" "Last night it was eye-opening." "David, you're worrying me. Are you sure everything's all right?" "I'm sure. I just want to catch up." "Okay, Richard gets home around 7. You can come for dinner." "Perfect. Thanks, Jennifer." "You're welcome. And David, I've missed you too." When David hung up, he realized he was trembling slightly. Jennifer had seemed genuinely happy to hear from him, which made everything more complicated. If she really didn't know about her husband's crimes, the truth would devastate her. He spent the whole day with Sarah and Mrs. Louise, planning how to handle the situation. Sarah had brought some of the evidence she'd gathered, stored in a detailed folder. "These are records of patients who underwent unnecessary procedures," she explained, showing David the documents. "Look at the costs and the number of surgeries." David examined the papers. Even without understanding all the medical terms, he could see the pattern. Patients who came in for simple consultations left with bills for tens of thousands of dollars. "And these are the transfer receipts to partner clinics," Sarah continued. "Money the hospital paid to labs where Dr. Richard had a stake." "How did you get these?" "Some I collected while I still worked there. Others my friend got for me. She's in the finance department now." "Doesn't that put her at risk?" "It does. That's why we need to act fast. The longer we wait, the more danger everyone's in." Mrs. Louise was studying some of the documents. "Son, I recognize some of these names. They're people from our community, our neighbors. People who were harmed by Dr. Richard. It looks that way, Mrs. Peterson, for example. She was hospitalized last year for a simple gallbladder surgery and ended up staying 3 weeks in the hospital with complications. She left there very weakened. And you think the complications were intentional? Now that I'm seeing these documents, I'm starting to suspect so. She always said she felt the doctors were performing more procedures than necessary." David was beginning to understand that the impact of Dr. Richard's crimes went far beyond the direct victims. Entire families had been affected. People had lost their life savings on unnecessary treatments. "How many victims do you estimate he's had over the years?" "It's hard to calculate, but based on what I've managed to document, at least 50 families suffered financially, and about 15 people had permanent physical damage." "Like Sarah," Mrs. Louise said sadly. "Like me," Sarah confirmed, "but I was lucky in one way. I survived and kept my mental capacity intact. Some of the other victims weren't so fortunate." David felt anger rising inside him. How could someone systematically harm innocent people out of greed? And how could his sister be married to someone like that without knowing? On the morning of the visit, David was visibly nervous. He hadn't seen Jennifer in almost 6 months, and now he was going to meet her, knowing terrible things about her husband. "Remember," Sarah instructed him, "today is just a family dinner. Observe everything, but don't ask direct questions about his work. Let him talk naturally. What if he suspects something?" Men like Dr. Richard are narcissists. They love talking about their successes. If you show interest and admiration for his work, he'll probably say more than he should. What about Jennifer? Watch how she reacts when he tells hospital stories. If she asks questions, if she seems interested or bored, if she shows any discomfort. David and Mrs. Louise arrived at Jennifer's house at 7 o'clock sharp. It was an impressive mansion in a gated community on the west side of Chicago. The automatic gate, the elaborate garden, the imported cars in the garage, everything indicated a very high standard of living. Jennifer opened the door herself, which surprised David. He expected her to have staff for that. "David," she said, hugging her brother, "wow, you look so different." "Different how?" "More mature, more serious." Jennifer was clearly thinner than David remembered, and there was something in her eyes that suggested exhaustion or worry. But she was impeccably dressed and made up, maintaining the successful appearance that had always been important to her. "Mom," she said, hugging Mrs. Louise, "I'm so glad you two reconciled." "Life's too short to hold grudges, daughter," Mrs. Louise replied. "Doctor." Richard appeared in the living room a few minutes later. David hadn't seen him in a long time and was surprised by the changes. He looked heavier, more arrogant, and wore obviously expensive clothes and accessories. "David, what a surprise," Dr. Richard said, extending his hand. "Jennifer told me you were reconciling. How wonderful." "Yeah, Richard. Time makes us wiser, huh?" "Exactly. And how's business? Still driving?" The question had a slightly condescending tone that irritated David, but he held back. "Yes, still driving. It's honest work." Of course, honest work is always respectable." During dinner, Dr. Richard dominated the conversation. He talked about the hospital, his patients, the successes he'd achieved recently. "You have no idea how rewarding it is to save lives," he said, cutting into an expensive piece of salmon. "Just yesterday I performed a complex surgery on an elderly woman who probably would have had only a few months to live without intervention." "What kind of surgery?" Mrs. Louise asked, trying to sound merely interested. "A gastrointestinal procedure. Very delicate, very expensive, but necessary. The family was very grateful." David watched Jennifer during this part of the conversation. She was pushing her food around without much interest, as if she'd heard similar stories many times before. "And are you planning to expand the clinic?" David asked. Dr. Richard smiled proudly. "Actually, yes. I'm developing a project for a new medical facility, something revolutionary with cutting-edge technology. It'll be a milestone in private medicine in the United States." "How interesting. And when will it be ready?" "We're in the fundraising phase. Soon we'll make an official presentation of the project." David noticed Jennifer seemed tense when her husband mentioned investors. "Is Jennifer involved in the project?" Mrs. Louise asked. "Indirectly," Dr. Richard replied. "She handles the social side, public relations. It's very important to have someone with her elegance representing our image." Jennifer smiled, but David saw the smile didn't reach her eyes. After dinner, when Dr. Richard stepped away to take a call, David took the chance to talk more privately with his sister. "Jennifer, you look tired. Is everything okay?" "I'm fine, David. Just a little stressed with some social commitments." "And Richard? He seems different." "Different how?" "More confident, like things are going really well for him." Jennifer hesitated before answering. "Things are going well. He's making a lot of money. His career is soaring. He should be happy, right?" "He should. But you don't seem happy." "David, She started but stopped when she heard Dr. Richard returning. The rest of the visit passed without any major developments, Dr. Richard kept boasting about his professional successes, and Jennifer maintained the facade of a satisfied, proud wife. When David and Mrs. Louise said their goodbyes, Jennifer walked them to the car. "David," she said, checking that her husband wasn't listening, "do you really want to reconcile with me, or is there another reason for this visit?" The question caught David off guard. "Why are you asking that?" "Because you were asking a lot of questions about Richard's work, and Mom too. You've never shown interest in those things before." David realized Jennifer was more observant than he'd given her credit for. "Jennifer, do you suspect something about your husband's work?" "What do you mean by that?" "You seem worried, like something's bothering you." Jennifer glanced toward the house, making sure Dr. Richard wasn't watching. "David, if you know something I should know, please tell me." "Why are you saying this?" "Because lately I've noticed strange things. Phone calls he takes in another room, documents he hides from me, large sums of money appearing and disappearing from our account with no clear explanation." David felt his heart race. Jennifer was starting to suspect on her own. "Jennifer, have you asked him about these things?" "I've tried, but he always says they're confidential medical matters that I wouldn't understand. And when I push, he gets angry." "And you accept those explanations?" "So far, yes. But, David, I'm not stupid. I know something isn't right." David looked at his mother, who was clearly waiting for him to decide how much truth to reveal at that moment. "Jennifer, if I told you people are investigating irregularities at the hospital where Richard works, would you be surprised?" Jennifer's face paled. "What kind of irregularities?" "Unnecessary procedures, Medicare fraud, serious stuff." "And Richard is involved?" "We think so." Jennifer stayed silent for a long moment, processing the information. "Who are these people investigating him?" "A nurse who worked with him. She has evidence." "What kind of evidence?" "Documents, recordings, medical records, things that prove a pattern of fraudulent behavior." Jennifer leaned against the car, visibly shaken. "David, if this is true, my whole life is going to fall apart." "I know, and I'm so sorry." "Are you sure about the evidence?" "We are. The nurse was one of his victims. She lost her eyesight because of an unnecessary surgery he performed to silence her. Jennifer covered her face with her hands. My God, how could I have been so blind? Jennifer, Mrs. Louise said softly, you couldn't have known. People like him are very good at deceiving those close to them. But I should have noticed the signs were all there. What matters now is deciding what you'll do with this information, David said. What do you want me to do? Help us gather more evidence, and when the time comes, testify against him. That means the end of my marriage, and probably serious financial trouble if they find out I benefited from the stolen money. Jennifer, Mrs. Louise said firmly, dirty money never brought true happiness to anyone, and you can't let him keep harming innocent people. Jennifer took a deep breath. I need time to think, and I need to understand more about what's happening. How much time do you need? A few days, a week at most. All right, but Jennifer, it's very important you don't give him any hint that you know anything. He could be dangerous if he feels threatened. I understand. I'll be careful. David hugged his sister. Jennifer, I know this is hard, but you're doing the right thing. I hope so. When David and Mrs. Louise got back to her house, Sarah was waiting anxiously to hear how the visit went. So, how did it go? Better than we expected, David replied. Jennifer was already suspicious that something was wrong. Really? She noticed changes in his behavior, strange things with money, hidden documents. She just didn't know what to do with her suspicions. And how did she react when you told her the truth? She was shocked, obviously, but she didn't seem surprised. It's like she already expected something like this. Will she help? She said she needs time to think. A week at most. And do you think she'll cooperate? I believe so, Mrs. Louise answered. Jennifer has made many mistakes in life, but she has a conscience. Once she fully understands what her husband did, she'll do the right thing. I hope you're right, because if she decides to warn him, she won't, David said firmly. I know my sister. She might be materialistic and sometimes selfish, but she's not cruel. When she finds out innocent people were hurt, she'll want to help make it right. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Over the next few days, David kept in daily contact with Jennifer. She asked specific questions about the evidence, wanting to understand exactly what Dr. Richard had done and how. Sarah had agreed to meet Jennifer in person to show her the documents and share her story in detail. The meeting was set for Thursday afternoon at Mrs. Louise's house. When Jennifer arrived, she was visibly nervous. Dark circles under her eyes showed she hadn't been sleeping well. This is Sarah, David introduced them. The nurse we told you about. Jennifer looked at Sarah with a mix of curiosity and unease. I'm so sorry for what happened to you, she said. Thank you, Sarah replied simply. Can you tell me exactly what my husband did? Over the next 2 hours, Sarah recounted her entire story in detail. Jennifer asked many questions, wanting to understand every aspect of what had happened. And you're sure he did this intentionally? Jennifer asked. Absolutely. I heard him say on the phone that he had taken care of the nurse problem. And then I found out other employees who questioned his procedures also had convenient accidents. Jennifer examined the documents Sarah had brought. Are these real patient records? Yes. All cases where unnecessary procedures were performed. And these amounts, money the hospital paid to clinics where your husband has a stake, public money in the case of Medicare patients, and private insurance money. Jennifer was clearly shaken by the extent of the scheme. How much money do you estimate he stole? Based on what I've documented, at least $5 million over the last 3 years. $5 million? And that's a conservative estimate. It's probably much more. Jennifer fell silent for a long moment. Our home, our cars, our trips, and all paid for with stolen money. Jennifer, Mrs. Louise said softly, you didn't know. It's not your fault. But I benefited. I lived a luxurious life at the expense of other people's suffering. What matters now is doing the right thing, David said. What right thing? How can I fix years of crimes? By helping us expose him, and cooperating with the authorities when the case goes to trial. Does that mean testifying against my own husband? It means testifying for the truth and for the victims, Sarah said firmly. Jennifer looked at Sarah with admiration and guilt. How can you be so strong after everything he did to you? Because I know the truth is more important than my anger or my pain, and because I don't want others to go through what I did. Do you forgive me for benefiting from his crimes? Jennifer, you don't need my forgiveness. You need to forgive yourself and use this experience to do something positive. Jennifer took a deep breath. All right, I'll help you, but I need to know exactly what you want me to do. First, Sarah explained, we need access to documents he keeps at home, especially anything related to the new clinic he's planning. He has a home office. It's locked, but I know where he keeps the key. Second, we need you to document his phone conversations, especially if he talks about patients or procedures. Can I record them? You can, but carefully. If he finds out, it could be dangerous. And third, when we're ready to file the formal complaint, we'll need you to confirm everything we've uncovered. It might mean publicly divorcing him. I've already decided I'm divorcing him. I can't stay married to someone like that. David was surprised by his sister's resolve. Are you sure? I am. These last few days made me realize our life together was a lie. Not just because of the crimes, but because he never respected me enough to be honest with me. And financially, how will you manage? I'll have to start over, maybe go back to work, sell the house, change my life completely. But I'd rather be poor and honest than rich and complicit. Mrs. Louise hugged her daughter, proud of her decision. Sweetheart, you're being so brave. I'm being what I should have been a long time ago, Mom. In the following weeks, Jennifer became a valuable ally in the investigation. She managed to photograph dozens of documents from Dr. Richard's office. Richard, including contracts with partner clinics and lists of investors in the new project. Look at this, she said during a meeting at Mrs. Louise's house. It's a list of doctors he's recruiting for the new scheme. Sarah examined the list. I recognize some of these names. They're young doctors, probably with student debt or financial pressure to succeed quickly. He's expanding systematically, David observed. It's worse than that, Jennifer said. I overheard a phone call of his yesterday. He's planning to open clinics in other cities too. Chicago is just the beginning. Then we need to act fast, Sarah said. How long do you think we need to gather enough evidence? We already have enough evidence for a criminal complaint, Sarah replied. But the more we have, the stronger the case. And what happens when we report him? He'll likely be arrested preemptively while the case is investigated. All his assets will be frozen, and there'll be a full investigation at the hospital. Jennifer looked sad hearing this. It's strange. Even knowing what I know about him, it's still hard to picture Richard being arrested. It's normal to feel that way, Sarah said understandingly. You lived with him for years. Even after finding out he's a criminal, there's still a part of you that remembers the man you loved. I really did love him at first, or at least the person I thought he was. And that person may never have truly existed, David said. People like him are very good at pretending to be someone they're not. What scares me is thinking about how many other wives might be in my situation, living with men who commit crimes and not knowing a thing. Unfortunately, probably many, Sarah replied, but you had the courage to face the truth. That's rare and admirable. A week later, they were ready to file the formal complaint. Sarah had contacted a lawyer specializing in medical crimes who was impressed by the amount and quality of the evidence gathered. This is one of the most well-documented cases I've ever seen, the lawyer said. You've done exceptional work. And what's the next step? David asked. We'll submit everything to the district attorney's office. They'll decide if there's grounds for a criminal charge. Based on what I'm seeing here, I'm confident there will be. How long does that process take? The complaint should be filed within 2 weeks. Preemptive arrest, if ordered, could happen a few days later. The trial itself might take months or even years. What about the victims? Will they be compensated? If he's convicted, yes, all his assets will be used to compensate the victims and reimburse the insurance providers and Medicare. Jennifer was nervous about the impending complaint. What about me? Will I face legal trouble for benefiting from the stolen money? Probably not, as long as you cooperate fully with the investigation. The fact that you didn't know the money's criminal origin and came forward voluntarily when you learned the truth works in your favor. Still, all our assets will be seized? Most likely. House, cars, bank accounts, investments, everything bought with criminally obtained money. Jennifer nodded, prepared for the consequences. I understand. It's fair. On the day the complaint was filed, Jennifer was visibly tense. She had moved to a small rented apartment anticipating the mansion's seizure. Dr. Richard still knew nothing, believing she was just spending time at her mom's place to care for Mrs. Louise's health. Are you sure you want to do this? David asked one last time. I'm sure. It's the right thing to do. The lawyer met them at the entrance of the district attorney's office. Everyone ready? He asked. Ready, Sarah answered, carrying a thick folder with all the evidence. Jennifer, you still have the chance to back out. Once we file the complaint, there's no turning back. I won't back out. Let's move forward. The presentation lasted 3 hours. The prosecutor asked many questions, examined all the documents, and listened to the testimonies of Sarah and Jennifer. This is definitely a case that deserves our attention, he said at the end. I'll prepare the criminal charges immediately. What about preventive detention? The lawyer asked. Considering the severity of the crimes and the flight risk, I'll request preventive detention. It will likely be granted this week. When they left the district attorney's office, everyone was emotionally exhausted. What now? Jennifer asked. Now we wait, Sarah replied, and we prepare for what comes next. Which is what? Probably a lot of media attention. A case like this usually gets public attention. I hadn't thought about that. Jennifer, David said, you need to be prepared for your life to become very public. Journalists will want to talk to you. They'll dig into your life. And what should I say? The truth. Always the truth. 2 days later, Dr. Richard was arrested in his office during business hours. Footage of his arrest was broadcast on every TV channel. Jennifer was at Mrs. Louise's house when she saw the news. How are you feeling? David asked. Relieved, she answered, surprising everyone. It's strange, but I feel relieved. Relieved? Because I don't have to pretend anymore. Because I don't have to live with suspicions and lies. Because I know he won't hurt anyone else. And sad too? And sad too. For the lost years. For the shattered illusions. But mostly sad for his victims. For everything they suffered while I lived comfortably, unaware. In the following weeks, the story gained even more attention than they had expected. Dozens of other victims came forward, some with stories even more disturbing than Sarah's. Jennifer became a public figure, giving interviews and appearing on TV shows to tell her side of the story. She always emphasized that the real heroes were the victims who had the courage to speak up. My role in this story was small, she said in one particularly emotional interview. I just did what any decent person should do when they discover they're living a lie. The real heroes are women like Sarah, who lost so much and still found the strength to fight for justice. The trial lasted 6 months. Dr. Richard was sentenced to 15 years in prison for fraud, aggravated assault, and running a criminal organization. All his assets were seized and divided among the victims. Jennifer had to start her life over completely. She went back to working as a secretary, a job she'd held before marriage. She lived in a simple 2-bedroom apartment and used public transportation. Do you regret anything? David asked during a Sunday lunch at Mrs. Louise's house, 6 months after the trial. I regret taking so long to realize who Richard really was. I regret living in a fantasy for so long, but I don't regret doing the right thing when I found out the truth. And are you happy now? I am. It's a different happiness than what I thought I wanted. But it's real. It's not based on lies or stolen money. It's based on knowing I'm a person of integrity. Sarah had undergone an experimental treatment and regained some of her vision. She could distinguish shapes and colors, though she still needed her cane to move around safely. The most important thing isn't how much I can see, she said, but making sure other people don't go through what I did. She had started awareness work about medical fraud, traveling across the country to share her story, and teach people to recognize warning signs. David kept in regular contact with both of them. The experience had brought the Mitchell family closer in ways they never imagined possible. "You know what's ironic?" he said, during one of their weekly family meetings they'd established. "Richard tried to destroy our family by hurting people we love, but in the end he ended up bringing us together." "The truth always brings people together," Mrs. Louise observed. "It's lies that tear them apart." "What do you think would have happened if David hadn't accepted that ride that night?" Jennifer asked. "I would have found another way," Sarah replied. "The truth always finds a way to come out, but it might have taken longer, and more people would have been hurt. That's true. Every day Richard remained free, he'd have more victims." David thought about the night that changed everything. If he'd refused the ride, if Sarah hadn't shouted for him not to turn onto that road, if he hadn't recognized his mom at the house door. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked. "I believe some things happen for a reason," Sarah answered. "Maybe not fate in the mystical sense, but a kind of cosmic justice. Evil never goes unpunished forever." "I believe in people," Jennifer said. "I believe that when faced with the truth, most people choose to do the right thing, like you did with me. And I believe in family," Mrs. Louise added. "No matter how much pain or separation there is, true love always finds a way to heal the wounds." A year after the trial, they gathered to mark the anniversary of the report. It wasn't exactly a celebration, but a moment to reflect on everything that had happened. "Do you know what the hardest part of this whole experience was?" Jennifer asked. "What?" "Admitting to myself that I'd chosen to live a life based on appearances rather than substance, that I'd become someone I didn't respect." "But you changed," David said. "I did. And it's the best change I've ever made." "And the hardest?" "And the hardest. But every real change is hard. If it were easy, everyone would do it." Sarah was working on a book about her experience, planning to use the profits to help other victims of medical fraud. "What's the title going to be?" Mrs. Louise asked. "Don't turn there," Sarah replied, "because sometimes life puts us in situations where we have to shout to avoid going down a path we know is wrong. Even when we can't see exactly where that path leads," David added. "Exactly. Sometimes we have to trust our instincts, the senses we have left, the inner voice that warns us when something isn't right. And sometimes we have to trust the people shouting to warn us," Jennifer said. "Even when we don't understand why they're shouting." The road David had almost taken that night became a symbol for the whole family. They passed by occasionally, especially when Sarah visited the city. "Do you smell the sycamore?" she always asked. "We do," was always the answer. "For me, it's no longer a smell that brings fear. Now it's a smell that reminds me sometimes the most painful detours lead us to the most important destinations." During one of these visits, they stopped the car at the entrance of the old road and sat in silence for a few minutes. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked. "I'm thinking about all the people we were able to help," Jennifer replied. "The families who didn't lose their savings, the patients who weren't subjected to unnecessary surgeries." "I'm thinking about courage," David said. "The courage you had to speak up that night, the courage Jennifer had to admit the truth, the courage Mom had to stand by us even knowing it would be painful. And I'm thinking about forgiveness," Mrs. Louise added. "The forgiveness Sarah had for our family, the forgiveness Jennifer had for herself, the forgiveness we all had to find to heal and move forward. And you, Sarah, what are you thinking about?" "I'm thinking that sometimes the worst things that happen to us turn into the best opportunities to make a difference in other people's lives. And I'm thinking about gratitude. Gratitude for finding a family that chose to stand on the right side of history, for discovering that kindness exists and that justice, even if it takes time, always comes." When they returned home that afternoon, they all understood that their lives had been permanently changed by a simple rideshare trip that had almost taken the wrong turn. The story spread beyond the borders of Chicago. Sarah was invited to speak at medical conferences, David became an advocate for rideshare drivers' rights, and Jennifer started a support group for families affected by financial crimes. "Sometimes people ask me if I'd go back in time to avoid this whole situation," Jennifer said during a talk she gave to wives of professionals. "And I always say no, because even though it was painful to discover I was living a lie, It was liberating to find out who I really was when faced with the truth. The message always resonated with the audience. Many women approached her afterward to share their own suspicions about their husbands, their own doubts about the source of their family's wealth. Jennifer always offered the same advice. Trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And remember, it's better to be poor and sleep with a clear conscience than to be rich and live in fear of the truth coming out. David had stopped driving for rideshare apps and opened a small transportation company specializing in services for people with disabilities. Sarah was his first client and his main advisor on how to adapt the services. "It's funny how our lives connected," he said during one of their trips. "If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be driving professionally for blind people, I never would have believed it. And if someone had told me I'd be working with the brother of the wife of the man who blinded me, I'd call it an impossible coincidence," Sarah replied. "Do you think there's some greater meaning in all this?" "I think the meaning is what we choose to do with the situations life gives us," Sarah said. "We can choose to be victims forever, or we can choose to use our experience to help others." "And what did you choose?" "I chose to use my story to educate people about medical fraud, to support other victims, and to build real relationships based on honesty." No regrets? Plenty of regrets, but also plenty of hope. Regret for the lost opportunities, for the people who were hurt before we could stop Richard, but hope because I see it's possible to rebuild a life on a stronger foundation. Mrs. Louise, who had witnessed her family's entire transformation, often reflected on the lessons learned. "My children taught me it's never too late to do the right thing," she told her church friends. Jennifer could have chosen to ignore the truth to maintain her comfort. David could have chosen not to get involved to avoid family problems, but they both chose the truth, even knowing it would be painful. "And what did you learn from all this?" a friend asked. "I learned that the strongest families are those built on truth, not convenience. And I learned that sometimes we have to lose everything to discover what truly matters." 2 years after Dr. Richard's conviction, the Mitchell family had become an example of how it's possible to rebuild after a moral crisis. They were often invited to share their story in churches, universities, and community groups. "The most important part of our story," David always said, "isn't what Dr. Richard did wrong. It's what we chose to do right after we discovered the truth." Sarah, who had become a public figure in the fight against medical fraud, always ended her talks with the same message. "If you leave here today with just one lesson, let it be this. When life puts you at a crossroads between painful truth and comfortable lies, choose the truth. Always. Because it's the only solid foundation on which you can build a life worth living." And Jennifer, who had become an advocate for victims of financial fraud, concluded, "Remember, it's never too late to change the course of your life. Even if you've lived years in a lie, you can always choose to start anew with the truth. And you'll find, as I did, that a simple and honest life is infinitely more fulfilling than a luxurious one built on crime." The last time they were all together at the entrance of Sycamore Road was on the 3rd anniversary of the report. It was a sunny day, and the scent of the trees was especially strong. "Do you know what I see when I look at this road now?" Sarah asked. "What do you see?" "I no longer see the place where I lost my sight. I see the place where our family found its true vision, the ability to see what really matters in life." "And what really matters?" Jennifer asked. "Honesty, courage, love that doesn't depend on lies to exist, and the certainty that we can always choose to do better, no matter how far we've strayed." David looked at his gathered family, his elderly but strong mom, his transformed sister, his brave friend who had become like a sister, and felt deep gratitude for that night when he had almost taken the wrong road. "You know what's most amazing?" he said. "What?" "If I had turned down that road that night, none of this would have happened. Dr. Richard would still be free, Sarah would still be suffering in silence, our family would still be broken, and hundreds of others would have been harmed." "That's true," Sarah agreed. "Sometimes a single decision, one moment of courage, can change not just our lives but the lives of many others. And sometimes that decision is simply listening when someone yells for us not to take a path we know is wrong," Jennifer added. When they said goodbye that afternoon, They all knew it would be the last time they'd visit that place as a symbol of the past. From then on, Sycamore Road would simply be a road, one among many they chose not to take because they found a better path. And the better path was one of truth, justice, a family united by honesty, and love that grows stronger when tested by life's hardest challenges. End of story. Now tell us what you thought of this story and where you're reading it from. Do you believe Jennifer made the right choice in choosing truth over comfort? Share your thoughts in the comments with sincere words. Your participation means so much to us. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other heartwarming stories like this one.